Welcome. This time we will be talking about Amendments 13 through 15. These are often called the Reconstruction Amendments because they were amended during the Reconstruction era after the Civil War. They were there to address fixing the country after it was rejoined after the war and dealing with slavery and bringing in the Black males as voting citizens. So, okay, let's get busy. So, Amendment 13 says, Section 1 says, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Just a side note, the Section 2 here is at the end of most amendments, giving Congress power to enforce that article of legislation, um, to make more laws that are needed in order to make this come about. So Congress is giving itself authority in a constitutional way as long as that amendment is ratified. Okay, so let's talk about Amendment 13. So, Amendment 13 addressed the articles in the Constitution that never used the word slavery or the word enslaved person. But there were permissions implied in the original Constitution. And that is because, as we all know, our American history, in order to get an actual constitution that would make our nation work, the founding fathers felt like they had to make some compromises with the states that allowed slavery. By 1788, slavery or lifelong servitude had been abolished in 5 or 6 states. It's according to the resource you look at. And these were Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Vermont. So the other states were still prospering from the works of slavery. And so they found these founding fathers, they integrated the idea of it being okay to have enslaved persons in the Constitution, even without the wording. So, in Article 4, Section 2, they talk about fleeing enslaved persons had to be returned to the states they came from. And so that is clearly implying slavery must be okay. Article 1, Section 2, it talked about how the states would enumerate their population for taxation and representation. So in Section 3, all other persons, which implied enslaved persons, would be counted as 3/5 of a person. So Southern states and states that allowed slavery could count their enslaved persons as 3/5 of a person, even though those persons could not vote. And so it gave extra voting representative power to those states who were slaveholding states. And this is what those who made the compromise decided had to be done in order to get a constitution ratified and a nation on its feet. So, what then? The 13th Amendment, back to where the amendment comes in. The 13th Amendment says that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So, after the passage of this amendment, Black citizens began to take their place in society. The world opened up. And during Reconstruction, over 2,000 Black Americans held office in a variety of levels, from the local all the way up to the U.S. Senate. So there have a picture of Senator Hiram Rhodes Revels, who was from Mississippi, and he served as a senator during this time period. There were prominent members in all of the states that were readmitted to the Union, so those that had been in rebellion, and all of those states had to have a state constitution convention and rewrite a new constitution. Their old constitutions were invalid because they were part of the Confederacy. So Black representatives were prominent members of these state constitution conventions all over the South. So Black Americans had taken their place, at least Black males, as far as the rules went in those days, had taken their place as leaders in the society, especially in the southern states. Now, this was an irritation to those who were in the southern states who had relied on the free labor and the societal structures of enslavement. And so, quickly as they could, they integrated back in what are called the Black Codes. And so the Black Codes, and then that led to Jim Crow rules. The Black Codes included labor laws. So in these labor laws, blacks were required to do long apprenticeships or labor contracts, often with their former enslavers doing their former work. So under the guise of a labor contract or an apprenticeship, they were re-enslaved. Convict leasing was huge. And even into the time period where I was a young person, in the early 60s, this was a thing still going on. So whenever former enslavers had a need on their plantations or some kind of a factory, Black persons were routinely arrested on vagrancy and other kind of trumped up charges and sentenced to labor under an exception clause. Now, all right, so let's jump back to the exception clause in the Amendment 13. So the Section 1 says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. All right, so slavery and involuntary servitude under Amendment 13 is allowed if it's punishment for a crime that a person has been duly convicted. Okay, all right. So convict leasing is like it's under the Constitution, could happen. Also under the Black Codes, Black Americans could not sue or be sued or even make contracts. So all the forward motion that they had made started to be degraded. So by 1894, Congress ended martial law in the southern states. So the southern states had been under martial law, so they heavily supervised to make sure the states were transitioning legally, constitutionally back into the Union. With the end of that martial law, and at the same time, a brewing KKK kind of exploded, and Black involvement in politics became increasingly dangerous and difficult, even impossible. So that by 1901, the last Black legislator in Congress lost his office. So that was Representative George Henry White. All right, interesting side note. The first Black legislator in Congress from a northern state, so not a southern state, but a northern state, was Representative Oscar Stanton DePriest from Illinois. He served from 1929 to 1935. So even though they were not the repressive Black codes, Jim Crow kinds of systemic issues going on in the northern states, the culture was suppressive. And it took until 1929 in Illinois, so the first state, to find a Black legislator, elect them to Congress. Okay. All right. So our 13th Amendment is there, and it is awesome. and it had some built-in flaws. Okay, Amendment 14. This one is a long one. Look at this. All right. We're going to take it section by section. So I just wanted you to see how big, like Congress is dealing with a whole bunch of things and combining it into one amendment. So let's look at Amendment 14, Section 1, and we're even going to break this one into pieces. All right. So Section 1, I'm going to read the whole thing and then we'll break it up. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. All right, so let's look at the different clauses of Amendment 4, Section 1. The first clause says that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. This clause directly overturns the Supreme Court's former Dred Scott decision. You probably remember this from American history class. This was in 1857. That decision said that Black persons could not be citizens and had no rights that white people were bound to respect. All right, so the citizenship clause clarifies that persons born in the United States or naturalized in the United States are indeed citizens. The exceptions to citizenship were Native Americans and children of diplomats. So you can understand why children of diplomats, maybe that would make sense that they were not naturally citizens. Native Americans were not granted citizenship until 1924 with the Native American Citizenship Act. So, go figure that one out. All right, let's go back. All right. So let's look at Amendment 14, Section 1, the Privileges or Immunities Clause. Says, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. And this became really, really important because they people who are born in the United States or naturalized in the United States and are people are of color or of a difference of culture are still citizens. And so if they are citizens, they have privileges and immunities as citizens of the United States. And this is still one that you see cases come up before the Supreme Court periodically as they wrestle with what are privileges and immunities. All right, let's go to the next section. The next clause is called the Due Process Clause. All right. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. All right, so this clause is designed to address Jim Crow and Black codes in the southern states. This went really well until 1894 when the Supreme Court took on the case Plessy versus Ferguson. You probably remember the story of Mr. Plessy, who got on a white train car, even though he was mixed race. And in the South, that was not allowed. So, they took this case to the Supreme Court, and the court said, "Oh, well, it is okay to have separate as long as it's equal." So separate but equal became Supreme Court approved interpretation of the due process clause. Now this became part of the law of the land until like 1954 with Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. So you probably remember studying this in school. And so, separate but equal became like, no, that does not work. And it took a while for that to all get hammered out. Okay, the last part of the Amendment 14, Section 1 says that this is called the Equal Protection Clause. All right, and it says, let's go back to Section 1. All right, that we shall not deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. All right, so that's America. We are equal as humans, and we have the right to equal protection under the law. Equal protection has been often in the Supreme Court. And so one of the things that I found interesting in studying this is finding out some of the ways that the court looks at equal protection. So equal protection is the clause that deals with discrimination. So if you are being discriminated against, you are not receiving equal protection under the law. So under the court system, the court has a way of what they call scrutiny of deciding how to look at equal protection or discrimination cases. The first one is called rational scrutiny. In these cases, the court believes that any plausible or legitimate reason for discrimination allow it to be constitutional. So rational is very general, and it can't be very serious. Is that is any plausible or legitimate reason for discrimination make it constitutional? This cannot be a big deal, so it's not used often. The other one is heightened scrutiny. So heightened scrutiny is in cases where there are suspect classifications. Now, suspect classification doesn't mean there's a suspect in a crime, but suspect that there's discrimination going on. All right, so under Amendment 14, suspect classifications include race and national origin. If there's a case with suspect classifications, the court operates under heightened scrutiny. This means that the government must have compelling and important reasons to justify discrimination, and the discrimination must be tailored to those reasons. So sometimes you'll hear, a court case saying, is there a compelling and important reason to justify this? No, there's not. Well, then we, cannot allow this to go on. Under heightened scrutiny, suspect classifications have expanded from not only race and national origin, but have expanded to include gender, immigration status, and wedlock status at birth. So these are categories that cannot be discriminated against under the Code of Heightened Scrutiny in Section 1 of Amendment 14. All right, let's look at Section 2. All right, this is a long one, and out of respect for the Constitution, I am going to not read the whole thing, but I'll get it started, and then I want you to read it. So, Section 2, representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective members, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians, not taxed. But when the right to vote at any election for the choice of electors for president or vice president of the United States, representatives in Congress, the executive and judicial officers of a state, or the members of the legislature thereof is denied to any male inhabitants of such state being 21 years of age, and citizens of the United States are in any way abridged, except for, all right, I did read it after, except for participation in rebellion or other crime, the basis of representation therein shall be reduced in the proportion which the number of such male citizens shall bear to the whole number of male citizens 21 years of age in each state. That is a long section. All right. And what it did was, it did a couple of things. One, it eliminated that 3/5 clause very clearly. Just that's how they wrote that eliminated the 3/5 clause. All right. Even though slavery was outlawed, they wanted to make sure that a whole person got a whole vote. And of course, in these days, it was males, and they were age 21. All right, so some of those things changed later on in the Constitution. All right. It also reduced the number of people that could be counted for representation if those people had participated in rebellion or crime, as in those who were in leadership in the Confederate government. So theoretically, those people were not enumerated for representation or for voting. So that's the the union saying, no, we're getting you back on this one. Okay. All righty. Let's look at section 3. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and read this whole one too. All right. Section 3, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of the president and vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or any executive or judicial officer of any state, to support the Constitution of the United States. So if they had sworn an oath to support the Constitution of the United States in the past, but shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof, all right, they cannot serve anymore in those official positions. So those who had been in Congress, in judicial offices, in state legislatures, and had sworn an oath to the Constitution, which was everybody, and had been part of the Confederacy, or done any aid or abetting of the enemies, had been part of the insurrection, they lost their ability to hold office again. So they clearly, in the Constitution, they did not use the word Civil War because they wanted to keep an eye on, if it's happened once, it could happen again. So they left it open and just used the words insurrection and rebellion. So if they shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against that oath of office to the Constitution, they cannot serve in office again. All right, the only way to remediate that is for Congress to vote 2/3 of each house to remove that disability. All righty. Sections 4 and 5. Let's go back to our administrative. This is how it's going to be carried out. And I want to get on to Amendment 15. So I will put the whole transcript of the Constitution in the notes here for you to read. All right, Amendment 15. All right, says in Section 1, The right of citizens to the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And then Section 2 is always Congress gives itself power to enforce the legislation. All right. So Amendment 15 was ratified in 1870 to assure, just to make very clear, that Black men could vote. All right. The amendment states that the right to vote could not be denied due to race, color, or previous condition of servitude. All right. So, however, the amendment did not clarify that the right to vote could not be abridged based on a literacy test or the ability to pay a poll tax or just implied threats. All right. So by 1901, then, the ability for Black men to register to vote or to show up to vote was almost impossible because throughout the southern states that had then were not under martial law anymore, so were doing what they wanted, and the Black codes were in effect. Is these literacy tests that probably most white people could not have passed were made it impossible to register or to vote. Poll taxes that were so high they could not pay them. Or sometimes just implied mean-looking people hanging around the polling areas. That lynching had become a thing. So it was too dangerous or impossible to vote. The states were not breaking the Amendment 15. They were not denying a person's right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. They found ways to threaten, intimidate, or make impossible Black people to vote. This was not rectified until 1965. I was a child when that came about. All right. And this was the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This act prohibited states from enacting qualifications for voting. So by the end of 1965, 250,000 new Black voters were registered. It happened fast. And by 1971, there were 13 Black members of Congress and 1 Black senator. So things started returning to the early Construction era freedoms. However, in 2013, the Supreme Court struck down a key provision in the Voting Act, which had to do with an algorithm for voting law changes. And so it said that those were not needed anymore. In other words, the Congress and the Supreme Court could keep track of changes to voting eligibility in different states. And so if a state tried to pass a law that made it more restrictive for people to vote, the Congress or the courts could say no. However, this was considered not needed anymore in 2013. And so since that was struck down, immediately states, Texas being the first that same day, they were already adding to voting restrictions. So these are issues that are still ongoing in courts and legislatures. So what we have is a constitution that is alive and it is ongoing. And it is our job as Americans. Remember, these are our natural rights and our contract with the government. So our government says that it will protect us, and we give up some of our natural rights in order to be protected. So the Constitution is a contract between us and the government, and it is full of people. And so we, the people, keep our eyes on things and use our voices and our constitutional rights where we think that the legislators or the executive branch or the Congress or the judicial system, the checks and balances. Remember, the 4 branches of government. So we've got Congress, We've got the presidency, we've got the court system, and we the people. And if something's off balance, we the people stand up and use our First Amendment rights and let it be known that everyone has to obey the contract, our U.S. Constitution.